Forbidden Love, Miami. Episode 2. The Vote. Previously, in Episode 1, The Weight of What We Cannot Have, architect Valentina Reyes, hired by the powerful Voss and Crane Development to design the Solara Project, discovered her late father's name buried in the permit chain connecting to the very land she is now building upon. A land her father, a city inspector, died on 4 years ago in a fall ruled accidental. Across the city, homicide detective Marco Duval, working the Reyes case off the Act 1. Watched. The second photograph. The low mechanical breath of a window air conditioning unit. A garbage truck reversing on the street below, 3 short beeps, then the hydraulic groan of the compactor. Somewhere in the building, a door closing, a lock turning. The ordinary sounds of a city waking up to another day it does not know is different from the last. Dawn had not quite decided to arrive. The sky outside Valentina Reyes' apartment was the color of an old bruise in the last stages of healing. That particular blue-gray that is neither night nor morning, that exists only in the 15 minutes before the sun commits to showing itself. She had not slept. She had not tried to sleep. She had spent the hours between midnight and now at her drafting table with the permit records spread before her in the cold blue light of her laptop screen. The same light she'd been sitting in when she found her father's name, and she had not moved except to refill her water glass twice and to stand at the window once, at around 3 in the morning, watching the street below as though it might offer an explanation. It had not. The permits were still there. Ernesto Reyes' name was still there. Voss and Crane Development was still there, woven through the chain of approvals like a thread you don't notice until you pull it, and the whole garment begins to shift. She picked up her phone. Habit. Reflex. The small, unconscious act of a woman who has been alone in a room with something terrible for 6 hours and needs, for just a moment, to hold something ordinary. She looked at the screen. There was a notification from the same unknown number that had sent her the first photograph, the one of her father's permit document, the one that had started all of this. And for a fraction of a second she thought, no, not again. Not at 6 in the morning with the bruise-colored sky outside, and her coffee cold and her hands already unsteady from a night of finding things she could not unfind. She opened it. It was a photograph of her and Marco Duval. The two of them, sitting across from each other in the rain-soaked diner on Brick Hill. 2 nights ago, when the rain had come down in the sudden, total way that Miami rain does, when she had gone there, because she needed to be somewhere lit and warm and public, and he had been there too, and they had sat across from each other with their coffee and their separate silences, and she had understood that neither of them was going to pretend the conversation was only professional. That photograph, that moment, someone had taken a picture of it. The image was sharp, professional, shot from a distance. She could see the condensation on the diner window, the slight fisheye of a telephoto lens working at range, but shot with enough clarity that she could read, if she looked closely enough, the expression on her own face. Not just her presence at the table. Her expression, her face turned toward his. The precise angle of 2 people whose attention is beginning to occupy the same center of gravity. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching them, specifically. And whoever that someone was had chosen to send the photograph. Not to the police. Not to a newspaper. To her. Directly to her. On the same number that had sent her the first photograph. The one that had led her to the permits. The one that had set all of this in motion. The cold that moved through her then was different from the cold of the first photograph. The first photograph had been about her father. About what was buried. It had carried the weight of the past. This one was about her. About what she was doing. About the present tense. The first photograph had said, "Look at what happened." The second said, "We are looking at you, right now, while you look." That was the worst part. Not the surveillance. The announcement of it. The deliberate, careful letting her know. Because a person who simply wanted to watch would not announce themselves. A person who announced themselves wanted something. Wanted her to feel observed. Wanted her to feel the weight of being seen and to make decisions accordingly. She put the phone face down on the drafting table. She looked at the surface of it, the dark glass, the small scratch across one corner that she'd gotten the year she finished her licensure, and dropped the phone in a parking garage, too tired to catch it. She breathed. She stood. She went to the window. Below, Coconut Grove in the early morning. A dog walker moving along the sidewalk, 3 dogs ranging ahead on their leashes like small, purposeful suns with moons in tow. A man in a reflective vest checking something in the back of a utility truck. A woman in workout clothes, earbuds in, running at the measured pace of someone who does this every day and has built her interior life around the consistency of it. Everything looked ordinary. Everything looked exactly as it always looked at 6 in the morning on a weekday, when the world had not yet fully populated itself with the noise and density of daytime. She did not know what she had expected to see. A man with a camera, perhaps. A car that didn't belong. Some legible evidence of the thing that had announced itself through her phone screen. There was nothing. Miami's ordinary face turned upward into the brightening sky. She went to the kitchen. She filled the Cafe Cubano press, her father's method, not the electric machine her roommate in grad school had used, but the stovetop press, the one that required patience and the right amount of attention, the one that smelled, when it began to work, like every kitchen of her childhood. She spooned in the coffee. She set it on the burner. She opened the cabinet above the stove and took down the mug her father had left at her apartment the last time he visited, wide-bottomed, chipped at the handle in 2 places, a terracotta glaze that had faded over the years to something warmer than its original color, something the color of dried clay and summer afternoons. She held it with both hands before the coffee was ready. Just held it. The way you hold something that belongs to someone who is not coming back for it.
Baba.
She was not a woman who talked to the dead. She had her mother's practicality in that regard. Her mother, who had gone back to work 3 days after the rosary, and said grief was something you carried, not something you parked. But she had talked to him at the funeral, silently, during the moment when the priest's voice went somewhere far away, and she had looked at the closed casket and thought, with a specificity that still startled her, "You didn't finish the espresso I made you. It was still on the counter when I got home. I kept it there for 3 days before I could pour it out." She thought of Rafi. She thought of the careful calm she had heard lately in her brother's voice when she called. The flatness that was not peace but performance. The steadiness of someone who had been frightened into stillness. She did not know precisely what Rafi had gotten himself into with Christian Mello's people. She knew enough. She knew the shape of it. She knew that Rafi, at 28, still believed that things could be managed, that debts could be renegotiated, that a charming enough manner and a willing enough disposition could buy you out of most trouble. She knew this because she had believed it herself, at 28, before the scaffold, before the Tuesday morning phone call, before she had learned the specific lesson that some things do not negotiate. The coffee press began to hiss. She did not call him. Not yet. She was afraid of what she would hear in his voice if she told him about the photograph, and she was not yet ready to be that kind of afraid. She had a limited amount of steadiness this morning, and she needed to ration it carefully. She poured the coffee into the terracotta mug. She drank it standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the permits still spread across her drafting table, the city going gold outside her windows, the world conducting its ordinary business all around her private emergency. Camille's office. The air conditioning of a government building. Institutional, slightly too cold. The muffled percussion of office equipment from adjacent rooms. A phone ringing twice and stopping. Marco Duval arrived at Camille Okafor's city council office at 8 o'clock in the morning on the dot. They had agreed on 7:30. He was never late, and he had not been late today. He had been on the sidewalk outside the building at 7:22, coffee in hand, watching the morning staff begin to arrive, and he had timed his entry for precisely 8, because he had learned over 15 years of investigations that arriving exactly on time to a meeting you suspect may have been compromised tells you more than arriving early. If Camille was there, she would comment on his punctuality. She always had. It would be normal. The meeting would proceed normally. He stepped into the outer office. The young assistant, a woman in her mid-20s with the particular composure of someone who has learned to be a buffer between powerful people and the world, looked up from her desk. And Marco, who read rooms the way other people read sentences, registered it immediately. The way she became very still when she saw him. Not startled, not unfriendly. Still, in the manner of someone who had been given specific instructions and was now deciding how to carry them out. "Detective Duval," he said, holding up his identification. "I'm here for Councilwoman Okafor." The assistant's expression did not change, which is itself a kind of expression. "The councilwoman called in this morning," the assistant said. "A family matter. She won't be in today." "I see," Marco said. He kept his voice professional, mild, the voice of a man for whom this is a minor inconvenience rather than a data point. "When did she call?" The assistant hesitated. In that hesitation, the answer. 11:30, she said. "Last night." 11:30 last night. Marco did the calculation without doing it visibly. Camille had left him the voicemail at approximately 10:45, the warning about the Solara vote, the careful, compressed urgency of her voice telling him that there were people who would do anything. 45 minutes after that phone call, she had called her own office to cancel. Not in the morning. Not before the meeting. At 11:30 at night, when offices were closed and the message would go to voicemail, where it would be found in the morning and relayed to anyone who showed up asking for her. "Please tell the councilwoman I stopped by," Marco said. He produced a card and set it on the desk. He smiled. Not the full smile, the professional approximation. "I hope the family matter resolves itself." He walked back out into the Miami morning. The sun was already asserting itself, the sky a particular shade of blue that existed only in South Florida. Saturated, almost aggressive, the sky of a place that did not do subtlety in its meteorology. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside the city council annex building and let the morning land on him. Then he walked to his car, got in, and sat. He did not drive away. He understood the space between what had been said and what was true. Camille had canceled at 11:30 at night, after calling him with a warning, after telling him the vote was 10 days away, 9 now, and after telling him that people would do anything. He had heard the careful calibration of her voice in that voicemail, the way she was choosing each word as though she knew the words might travel. He had assumed that was professional caution. He was beginning to revise that assumption. Something had happened after her call, or something had been about to happen. And Camille Okafor, who had survived 4 years as the widow of a dead detective and then won a city council seat by 12 points and was not, by any measure, a woman given to flight. Camille had chosen not to be in her office this morning. He opened the Reyes file from the passenger seat, found the page he had bookmarked the night before, Guillermo Paz. Site supervisor, Voss and Crane Development. One of the two original witnesses to Ernesto Reyes' scaffold fall. One of the two men whose written statements were so similar in phrasing, so precisely matched in their recollection of details, that a second reading made the similarity visible in the way that all performance is eventually visible if you look long enough. He picked up his phone, dialed the number he had found through the contractor's licensing board. It rang once, twice, 5 times, 8 times. No answer, no voicemail, just the repetitive patience of a phone ringing in a space where no one was choosing to answer it. Marco noted the time in the file margin in pencil, 8:14 a.m. He started the car. Warmer than usual. The controlled hum of a high-end architecture firm, the white noise of a place where important things happen quietly, the distant percussion of keyboards, the soft elevator chime. Valentina Reyes walked into Voss and Crane at 8:55 in slate gray, her hair in a not so architecturally precise, it seemed load-bearing. She had showered and pressed her clothes and applied her makeup with the attention of a woman building a facade she intends to stand up to close inspection, and she walked through the glass lobby doors, and across the marble floor, and into the elevator with the particular posture of someone who has decided that performance is, this morning, a form of survival. The office received her as it always did, with the ambient hum of productive ambition, the particular frequency of a place where money was being organized into beauty. Her colleagues moved through their mornings. The rendering department was already lit. The conference room on the east side showed 2 early arrivals around a projected site plan. The coffee station had been restocked. Everything ordinary. She settled at her desk. She opened the Solara Project renderings on her monitor, the elevation drawings, the site plan, the cross-section that showed the underground parking structure she had spent 3 weeks engineering around the water table. She looked at them with the practiced eye of a woman who had designed these herself and knew every line and knew, now, what they were built upon, and she looked at them anyway because the alternative, staring at the wall and visibly falling apart, was not available to her today. Diana Voss appeared in her doorway. She was in charcoal wool and a single strand of pearl, the same restrained elegance she deployed the way other people deployed weapons. And she was warmer than usual. This was, Valentina would later reflect, the most alarming thing she had encountered today, and this was a day that had begun with a surveillance photograph sent to her at 6 in the morning from an unknown number. Diana's warmth was not warmth. It was the performance of warmth, executed with such fluency that it was, in most contexts, indistinguishable from the real thing. Valentina had not always known this. She knew it now. "These are extraordinary," Diana said, stepping into the office, not asking, not knocking, but entering in the manner of a woman for whom every room she enters becomes, by the simple fact of her presence, her room. She was looking at the Solara renderings on the screen. "You have a gift for making things look inevitable." "Thank you," Valentina said. "How are you sleeping?" Diana asked. She said it lightly, companionably. "The Solara timeline is demanding. I want you to know I'm aware of that." "I'm sleeping fine," Valentina said. Diana held her gaze for exactly half a second longer than the conversation required. Her smile remained perfectly in place. Then she turned to go. "Good," she said from the doorway. "We need you at your best." She was gone. Valentina sat very still. The renderings glowed on the monitor in front of her. She was aware of her own breathing, the deliberate, even quality she was maintaining, and of the afterimage of Diana's smile, which was always, she understood now, a form of measurement. Diana had come to take a reading, to see if Valentina's surface had changed, to assess whether the woman sitting at this desk was still the woman Voss and Crane had hired, or whether something had shifted beneath the architecture of her composure. She had passed the assessment. She thought she had passed. She hoped she had passed. She picked up a pencil. She drew a straight, clean line across the blank margin of her notepad. Thought, load-bearing walls don't announce themselves. They sit quietly inside the structure, holding everything up, invisible until they are not. You find out they were there when the building comes down. Rafi calls. Wind at height, the ambient displacement of a high-altitude terrace. The sound of Brickell Avenue far below, compressed, miniaturized by distance, the city reduced to its most essential frequencies. Her phone vibrated at 11:17. The name on the screen, Rafi. She stood, gathered the phone, and walked out through the glass door to the firm's terrace. 34 floors up, the Miami morning was laid out below her, Biscayne Bay catching the late morning sun in 1,000 moving fragments, the Brickell Towers throwing their hard shadows westward, the expressway a gray ribbon through the city's green. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hey," she said. "Hey," said Rafi. She heard it immediately. The careful calm, the specific, practiced flatness that her brother had developed in the years since their father died, the sound of a man keeping a lid on something by sheer deliberate force. She had learned to hear it the way you learn to hear a particular creak in the floor of a house you know well. Not just the sound, but what the sound means. "I had a visitor," he said. She gripped the terrace railing. The metal was warm from the sun. Below her, The city continued its beautiful, indifferent business. "Tell me," she said. Rafi told her. A man he didn't recognize, at his apartment building, not in the lobby, outside, on the sidewalk, as though he had been waiting. He didn't threaten, not exactly, Rafi said. Not in words that would mean anything later, not in a way that could be characterized by a lawyer or a police report. He had simply told Rafi that his sister was asking questions. About old city business. About contracts. About permits. About things that had been closed and settled. And that his sister was a talented woman with a very promising career. And that it would be a genuine shame if something were to complicate it. Rafi delivered it flatly, trying to be steady, trying to give her the information without the panic that lived underneath it, trying to be her younger brother rather than the frightened 28-year-old she could hear in the spaces between his words. The shake he would not let through. She could hear it trying to come through anyway, in the almost imperceptible hesitation before certain syllables, in the way he breathed after finishing a sentence, as though each sentence required a small, private recovery. She did not let anything change in her voice. She was very good at this. "Rafi," she said, "listen to me. I need you to go somewhere with people. Dario's place, or the restaurant, anywhere with noise and witnesses. Don't be alone today. Don't be alone at your apartment. Val, please, just do this for me today." A pause. She could hear him thinking, the specific quality of her brother's silences, which had always been slightly too long, slightly too full of the thing he was deciding not to say. "What's going on?" he asked. "Quiet now." The performance of steadiness dropping. "I know, Rafi," she said. "I know." She ended the call. She stood at the railing, 34 floors above Miami. The bay in its perpetual gold and green, the palms on Bayfront Drive moving in the coastal wind, the ordinary grandeur of a city that had no idea, could have no idea, that a woman was standing above it holding the railing with both hands and calculating, with the methodical precision of someone who has spent her career understanding structural stress, exactly how much danger she was in. Exactly how much danger she had put her brother in by asking questions about a building she should have been grateful to design. They had threatened Rafi, not her, Rafi, because they had done the calculation. Because they knew that the way to reach a woman like Valentina Reyes, a woman who had endured her father's death and rebuilt herself around the endurance of it, was not through her own fear, but through her love. Through the people she could not stop caring about no matter how capable she became. The sun was very bright. The city was very beautiful. She stayed at the railing until she was sure her face had settled back into something she could carry inside. Contact. The ambient noise of a Brickell coffee shop, the hiss of an espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations not meant to be overheard, the door chime as customers enter and leave. Outside the window, traffic on the avenue, a bus pulling away from the stop. She used the lunch break she did not take for lunch. She walked 2 blocks north of the Voss and Crane building to a CVS on the corner of Brickell and 8th, and she stood in the prepaid phone aisle for 45 seconds, long enough to look like a person deciding rather than a person executing a plan, and she selected a prepaid phone with $20 of airtime, paid cash, and walked to the coffee shop on the next block. She ordered at the counter. She took a table by the window. She activated the phone, entered the number from the business card Marco Duval had given her at the diner, and she dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Duval," he said. "It's Valentina Reyes," she said. A beat. She could feel him recalibrating, from whatever he had been doing, whatever case or task or thought she had interrupted, to this. "I see a new number," he said. "Yes," she said. "I bought it 20 minutes ago. I want to tell you something, and I didn't want to tell you on my personal phone." "All right," he said. And then, quietly, "Tell me." She told him about the photograph. She was precise about it. The angle, the apparent distance of the shot, the quality of resolution, the fact that whoever had taken it had been close enough, or equipped enough, to capture expression. Not just presence at the table. The specific quality of how 2 people looked at each other in a moment they believed was private. She described the timestamp on the message, the same unknown number as the first photograph. She heard him process this. A breath. A pause. The specific sound of him setting something down on a flat surface, a file, a coffee cup, something, so that he could be fully in this conversation. Do you still have the image? He asked. Yes. Don't delete it. Don't clear the conversation. We need to be able to recover the metadata. I know, she said. We need to meet, he said. In person. Not a coffee shop near your office. Not anywhere on Brickell. Where? He gave her an address. A residential address in Coral Gables. She knew the street, had driven it, had cataloged it the way she cataloged all neighborhoods, in terms of its built environment, its materials, its scale. A quiet block. Ground floor units. Bougainvillea over the gateways. She understood, without his saying so, that it was his address. She was quiet for a moment. I know what I'm asking, he said, before she could respond to the quiet. Do you? She said. He was quiet. The pause of a man considering honesty against the particular professional and personal cost of it. Not entirely, he said. No. She looked through the coffee shop window. Brickell Avenue in the Miami afternoon, the palms moving in the coastal wind with their particular, unhurried grace, the traffic flowing past, a woman on the sidewalk arguing pleasantly into her phone, two men eating lunch on a bench with the comfortable familiarity of people who have been doing this particular thing together for years. The entirely ordinary surface of a city eating its lunch, in full ignorance of everything happening beneath that surface. 7 o'clock, she said. Act 2. His address. A Coral Gables evening, tree frogs beginning, the low rustle of a breeze through Bougainvillea, a neighbor's television through an open window somewhere down the block. The sound of a car slowing to park. Marco Duval's apartment was a ground floor unit in a 1960s Coral Gables complex. The kind of building that had once been unremarkable and had become, by sheer virtue of age and location and the fact that it had not been torn down and replaced with something glass and ambitious, something close to distinguished. There were birds of paradise in the planting beds outside his door. The door itself was painted a dark green that was almost, but not quite, black. He had cleaned without making it obvious that he had cleaned. Valentina, who had grown up in a house where cleaning was a form of storytelling, her mother announcing important conversations by mopping the kitchen, registered this immediately and noted it and said nothing about it. The apartment was spare and functional, with the particular impersonality of a space that belongs to a man who has not decided, yet, to fully inhabit his own life. One lamp. A couch that had been expensive once. A low coffee table with a cleared surface. She noticed the cleared surface. And then, the one unexpected thing. Above the kitchen cabinets, a shelf of paperback novels. Not displayed. Used. The spines cracked from repeated opening, some of them multiple times. She could tell from the way certain spines had been broken in more than one place. The way a book looks when you have read it, and then, later, gone back to it, and opened it to a specific page because you needed to find something again. The titles were half legible, the text faded on some, readable on others. She caught Morrison, Marquez, a battered Camus, two James Baldwins with the covers worn soft at the corners. He opened the door, and they stood for a moment in the architecture of the threshold, neither of them crossing it yet, both of them very briefly suspended in the space between the official pretext of this visit and the other thing, the thing neither of them had named. He stepped back. She came in. The apartment settled around them. He gave her coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug, the gesture so similar to this morning with her father's cup that it caught in her chest for a moment, the way certain gestures do when they rhyme with grief. And he was looking at her hands, and she noticed him noticing, and he noticed her noticing that he was noticing, and neither of them said anything about any of it. And the room held all of it quietly, the way rooms do. The professional pretext was getting thinner. They both knew it. It was like watching a fog burn off the bay, not sudden, not dramatic, just the gradual revelation of the shape that had been there all along. She had been in this apartment for 4 minutes. She had not yet decided what that meant. Everything on the table. The rustle of papers. The soft scrape of 2 chairs at a kitchen table. Somewhere outside. The tree frogs continuing. A car passing on the street. The apartment's refrigerator cycling on with a low hum. They spread their materials across the kitchen table. 2 separate investigations, accumulated over different periods of time from different angles and motivations, converging on this surface. Valentina's copied permit records, arranged in the order she had assembled them over the past 48 hours. The original anonymous photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly grainy, of her father's document. Her notes in pencil on yellow legal paper. The shorthand of a woman trained to translate complex systems into visible form. Marco's file. The original incident report. The coroner's findings. The matched witness statements with their suspicious uniformity of language. The circled names. Guillermo Paz's work history with Voss and Crane. The web he had drawn on the legal pad. Her own name among the others. Surrounded by lines she could now read. They stood on opposite sides of the table at first, and then they were both sitting, and then they were both leaning over the same section of documents, close enough that the kitchen table of a ground-floor apartment in Coral Gables seemed not quite wide enough for the seriousness of what they were uncovering. They pieced it together. For the first time, completely. Ernesto Reyes had been the city inspector assigned to sign off on the Port District Land Survey, the final certification that cleared the site for acquisition by the entity that would eventually become the Solara Project. His signature appeared on the permit chain in 3 places. The first 2 were consistent with the rest of his documented work, the handwriting she knew from 1,000 personal and professional documents, from birthday cards and the inscriptions in books he gave her, and the notes he tucked into the bag lunches he packed for her the summer she came home after her first architecture job fell through, as though she were still 12 years old and needed feeding, which she had. She was leaning close to the 3rd document, pointing at a line. "That's not his signature," she said. Marco leaned in from across the table, their proximity reduced to inches, both of them looking at the same photocopied signature, the document flat between them. "How sure are you?" he said, not doubting, wanting precision. "Completely," she said. "Look at the R. In Reyes. My father made the R a specific way. The leg of it had a particular angle, a kind of kick at the bottom that he'd developed from the way his mother taught him to write cursive. I've seen that signature on hundreds of documents. City permits, appraisal forms, the deed to our house, my college recommendation letter." She paused. "This is close. It's a very good approximation. Someone studied it. But the angle of that leg is wrong. It's off by about 10 degrees, and it doesn't have the kick. Someone with a steady hand and access to his genuine signature made this. But it isn't his." Marco was very still. He had the quality of stillness that arrived in him at moments of significance. Not absence, but heightened presence, everything concentrated inward. "If he didn't sign it," he said. "He was going to refuse," she said. The words came out steady and careful, the way she talked when she was working to keep her voice out of her body's way. "The survey, I've been looking at it. The site had drainage issues that the preliminary report understated. Significant ones. Any experienced inspector doing his job honestly would have flagged them and required additional remediation before signing the land transfer. That would have delayed the acquisition by months, possibly more. And he was good at his job. He was principled about his job. He was the man who came home once and told Rafi and me about a developer who had offered to take him to dinner and how he had said no, because you don't eat dinner with the people you're reviewing. He was that kind of man." She stopped. Marco looked at her. "So someone knew he was going to refuse to sign," he said. "And before he could." She did not finish his sentence. She did not need to. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the tree frogs. The refrigerator humming. The ordinary night sounds of a city that keeps all its worst history in its paperwork, in its permit chains, in the load-bearing foundations of its beautiful buildings. The silence held between them like something fragile and important, like a piece of evidence that changed the shape of everything.
Guillermo Paz.
He found Guillermo Paz at a commercial construction site in Doral at 9:30 the next morning. A mixed-use development on the western edge of the city, the kind of project that had been going up all over Miami-Dade for the past 5 years, eating the flat western landscape one concrete pour at a time. Paz was on the ground level, directing a crew of 4 men with the practiced authority of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and knew every mistake that could be made because he had either made it himself or cleaned up someone else's. He was compact, in his mid-50s, with the weathered density of a man who had spent his working life outdoors in the South Florida sun, the skin of his forearms and neck the particular texture that comes from years of that specific combination of heat and UV and physical labor. When Marco badged him, quietly, away from the crew, near the base of a concrete wall that threw good shade, Paz's first reaction was not to look at the badge. It was to look around the site, at the cranes, at the other workers, at the supervisor's trailer across the lot. Marco noted this. A man who, at the sight of a detective's badge, looks not at the detective but at his surroundings. A man checking to see who can see him. They stood in the shade. Paz worked the brim of his hard hat with both hands, turning it, not putting it on, the nervous habit of a man with something to do with his hands while he decides something. I don't want to talk about this, Paz said. He said it immediately, before Marco had asked anything, which was itself an answer. I understand that, Marco said. A silence. Paz looked at his crew across the site. They were 40 feet away and fully occupied. No one was watching. The statements, Marco said. Not asking. Not yet. Just naming it. Paz turned the hard hat again, set it on the wall beside him, looked at his hands. Then he talked. The coach statements, yes. He confirmed it. A man had come to both witnesses separately in the 48 hours before the police interviews. Not Diana Voss. Not anyone from Voss and Crane directly. Not anyone who presented himself with a name or affiliation. A middleman, he said. The word sat in the construction site air with particular weight. Paid in cash. Told them what had happened. That Ernesto Reyes had been drinking. That the scaffold buckle was user error. That this was the account of events they would provide to the investigating officers, because it was, after all, consistent with what they had observed, wasn't it? Wasn't it consistent? And the intonation on the question had been such that both of them had understood it to be something other than a question. I needed the money, Paz said. He said it without asking for forgiveness. Not performing remorse and not performing indifference. Just saying the plain truth of it, in the way that the plainest truths are the ones that carry the most. I'd been out of work 6 months. My daughter was in high school. The cash it was real. The money they were offering me to say what I was already seeing. That's what I told myself, that I was just saying what I was seeing. But Ernesto wasn't drinking, Marco said. Paz looked at him, for the first time in the conversation, directly, without looking away. No, he said. He wasn't. Marco let that sit for a moment. Then, would you be willing to testify? Paz went quiet. He looked at the cranes again, the great, slow arms of them moving against the blue sky, doing their work without opinion or consideration. He picked up his hard hat. He held it. I have a daughter, he said. I understand, Marco said. With respect, detective. Paz looked at him steadily. I don't think you do. Marco walked back across the construction site, across the gravel and the rebar and the flat, unfinished surfaces of a building not yet decided. He reached his car, and he sat in it, and he held the feeling that a man in his profession accumulates over the years in the specific sediment of moments like this one. The weight of justice when the cost of truth falls on people who are not responsible for the lie, but are responsible, now, for carrying its consequences. Guillermo Paz had a daughter, and the people who had paid him to lie 4 years ago knew he had a daughter then, and they knew it now, and they had paid him in the knowledge of exactly what kind of pressure that constituted. He wrote in the file margin, Paz, oral confirmation, will not testify. He underlined the last sentence twice. Then he started the car. The offer. Diana Voss called Valentina into the boardroom at 2 o'clock. Not emailed, not asked through the assistant, called. The direct line to Valentina's desk, which Diana had never used. Valentina picked it up on the second ring and Diana said, "Would you come to the boardroom?" And the phrasing of it, the courtesy of the "would you," was its own kind of message because Diana Voss did not ask. She invited, and her invitations were the same as commands, with the additional quality of making you feel that you had chosen to comply. The boardroom. The same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same view of Biscayne Bay going silver in the afternoon heat, the same table that seated 20 and currently held 2. But the chairs had been rearranged, or not rearranged, simply occupied differently, since the last time Valentina had been in here. Diana was at the head of the table, not at the side, at the head, with her hands folded on the surface in front of her in the posture of a woman who has arranged the room to say something she prefers not to say directly. Valentina took the chair across from her. The power geometry of it registered immediately, the table between them, Diana at the position of authority, Valentina in the position of person being assessed. She sat as though she hadn't noticed. She was very good at sitting as though she hadn't noticed things. "I want to talk to you about an opportunity," Diana said. She slid a folder across the table. It moved with the precision of a woman who has slid folders across tables many times and knows exactly how to make the gesture look like generosity. Valentina opened it. The Bayside Cultural Center. A city-funded arts complex on the waterfront. She knew the site. She had driven past the cleared lot a dozen times and thought about what it could hold, the way architects are constitutionally unable to look at empty lots without populating them. $40 million in public and private funding. 3 years to design and build. A building on the water, in a city that measured its architecture by its relationship to the water. A building that would carry her name in Miami forever, in the way that very few buildings carry the name of the architect rather than the firm. Valentina's name had been submitted by Voss and Crane for the preliminary design bid. Diana had put her name forward personally. She read the scope pages. She read the timeline. She read the budget structure. She did all of this with the professional attention a document of this significance demanded, and simultaneously she understood, with a clarity that arrived not as thought, but as the kind of physical knowledge that lives below thought, exactly what she was holding. Not a reward, a rope. If she accepted this commission, she was bound to Voss and Crane, not merely employed by them, but named with them, her career fused to theirs, her future inseparable from the company that had built the Solara Project on her father's forged signature and her father's death. For the duration of this project, she could not be an architect working for Voss and Crane while simultaneously reopening the death of a city inspector whose signature Voss and Crane had forged. She could not carry both of those things. The commission was a binding, dressed as an honor, and Diana was watching her read it with the expression of a woman who has made many such offers and knows precisely what they cost. If she refused, she tipped her hand. She revealed that she knew something, or suspected something, or had a reason to step back from the greatest professional opportunity of her career. In this particular room, with this particular woman, that was not a card she could afford to show. She looked up from the folder. "I'm honored," she said. The word honored landed in her mouth, like something she needed to bite through cleanly to keep from showing what was beneath it. "I'll need to review the timeline against the Solara deliverables. I want to make sure I can give this the attention it deserves." "Of course," Diana said. Her smile, warm, calibrated, measuring. "Take a few days." She held Valentina's gaze for a moment. Then, "You have a real future here, Valentina. I want you to know that I see it. Don't let anything distract from it." The word distract fell into the conversation and stayed there. Valentina held Diana's gaze and smiled, and said, "Nothing will." She closed the folder. She stood. She carried the folder back to her office with her spine straight and her pace measured and her face giving nothing away, which was, she would think later, the finest architectural achievement of her career to that point, the construction of a perfect surface over a load-bearing emergency. Bayfront, neutral ground, open air, a place where two people could be seen together without it meaning anything, where what was said between them could be deniable by the simple fact of their surroundings. They walked rather than sat, because what they needed to say was too large and too mobile to be said sitting still. It needed space to move through. It needed the rhythm of footsteps to make it bearable. The bay was going gold and rose in the late light, the water catching the sunset at 1,000 different angles simultaneously, the way only open water can. The Brickell skyline to the south threw its hard geometry against the soft sky. The palms along the waterfront path moved in the coastal breeze with their characteristic indifference. Palms had been here before the city, and they would, Valentina had always obscurely felt, be here after it. She told him about the offer. He listened without interrupting. The quality of his attention, she was learning, was one of the most disconcerting things about him, because it was genuinely complete. He did not listen while formulating his response. He listened, and then he responded. "It's a binding," he said. "Yes," she said. "She knows something, or suspects something." "She always suspects something," Valentina said. "That's how she's built. The question is whether she suspects specifically or generally." He told her about Paz, about the coach's statements, the cash, the middleman, about the daughter. She was quiet for a moment, processing it not with shock, because she had already understood the shape of what had happened to her father, but with the particular grief of having it confirmed, of moving from what she had believed to what she now knew. Those were different weights. "He won't testify," she said. "No. We need the documents. The forgery, confirmed. And we need something that connects Voss to the payment, to the middleman." "Working on it," he said. They walked. The path curved along the seawall. They slowed, naturally, at a section of railing over the water, the bay very close here, the evening light generous in the specific Miami way that made everything beautiful by making it honest. No diffusion, no flattery, just the light landing on things exactly as they were. She was looking at the water. He was looking at her, and this time she knew it. She felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure, the way a building feels a change in load. She turned. They were very close. The setting sun caught the angle of her face. The Miami evening light that Valentina had grown up in and had learned, over the course of her life, to stop seeing because it was simply the light of where she was from. It caught her now the way it catches things when you suddenly see them with someone else's eyes. Generous, cinematic, too honest to look away from. "What are we doing?" she said. "Investigating," he said. She gave him a look that was precise and complete, and he received it the same way. "Marco," she said. He said her name back. Just that, Valentina. And it landed in his mouth differently than it did in anyone else's. She had been hearing her name said her entire life, and it had never landed quite the way it did in this man's voice, with this man's attention, in this particular light on this particular evening, with this particular case spreading out around them like the water below the railing, everywhere they looked. His hand moved. Not toward her face, not a gesture of performance. Toward her, simply, the way a tide moves toward a shoreline, without the drama of decision, just the irresistible mechanics of proximity. It stopped, not inches away. It stopped, and she breathed, and he breathed, and the moment stretched until it had weight and substance and the particular quality of something that cannot be made to unhappen even if it is not completed. Her phone lit up. She felt it in her jacket pocket, the vibration, insistent. She reached for it. Not the burner. Her regular phone. A text from Rafi, at Dario's. "I'm okay. Call me when you can." She looked at the phone. The moment had passed, or it hadn't passed. It had been deferred. With the precision of long observation, that deferred things accumulate interest. Every day they are not resolved, they compound. She looked at the phone. The moment had passed, or it hadn't passed. It had been deferred, and deferred things accumulate interest. Every day they are not resolved, they compound. She thought about his hand, stopped in midair, the entire drive home. The recording, He was still awake at 11:47 when the text arrived from Camille. No greeting. No preamble. Just a parking garage address in Overtown and a time, 6 a.m. tomorrow. Then, there is a recording. Voss and Mello, before the port land was acquired. I can get it, but I need 3 days. Then, don't call me back on this number. He sat on the couch with the phone in both hands and read it twice. Then he sat with it for a moment more, just sat, in the specific stillness of a man training himself not to move too fast towards something he wants to be true. A recording. Voss and Mello, before the land acquisition, before the permits were filed, before the site survey, before Ernesto Reyes was assigned to inspect a piece of land that people with serious money had already decided was going to move in one specific direction regardless of what any city inspector found. A recording of those two people, in conversation, before any of the official machinery of the Solara Project was set in motion. If such a thing existed, if it was what Camille was describing, it was the center of the entire case. It was the thing that moved everything else from the realm of suggestive circumstance to something that could be used. He had learned, over 15 years of investigations, to hold things like this with two hands and not press on them. To let them be what they were going to be without loading them with what he needed them to be. He had learned this the hard way, from cases that had almost broken open and hadn't, from witnesses who almost testified and didn't, from evidence that almost held and was found inadmissible. He knew how to not fall in love with a lead. He screenshotted the text anyway, then opened the Reyes file and wrote in the margin, Day 7 of 10 before vote. Recording, Voss/Mello, per C.
Oh.
Pickup, 6 a.m. Overtown Garage. He thought about Camille, about the fact that she had canceled her office appearance at 11:30 at night and now, in the same night, was sending him the location of a piece of evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful developers in Miami. He thought about the photograph of Valentina's face, taken by someone who had been close enough to capture expression, who had chosen to tell her she was being watched. He thought about Paz, and about the particular sentence Paz had said as a statement of fact rather than appeal. I have a daughter. He thought about the vote. 8 days. 9 days. He had lost count. The city council vote on the Solara Project, the thing Camille had originally called him to warn him about, the thing that had set this specific timeline in motion. For days now. For days until the vote went forward or didn't. He lay down on the couch. He did not sleep. Outside the apartment, the club's base, the palm fronds, the siren's recession, the city at 1 in the morning conducting its restless, gorgeous, insomniac life. Miami did not sleep particularly well. He had always felt at home in that. He thought about Valentina's hand on the railing over the bay, the way she said his name, the specific articulation of it, the way the 3 syllables arranged themselves in her mouth, Marco, the second syllable rising slightly. He thought about his own hand, stopped in midair. He thought about what it meant that he had not withdrawn it, that he had left it there, suspended, rather than pulling it back. The distinction between a gesture not made and a gesture deferred. 4 days to the vote. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep. Act 3. The wait. Port District. 5 days before the vote. She drove alone to the Port District. The old side, the part that the development hadn't reached yet, where the city's commercial ambitions had been focused on the newer piers and the upgraded cruise terminals and the mixed-use fantasies spreading north and west, and the old side had been left with its gravel and its chain link and its particular, unbeautified honesty. She found the street on her phone's map and drove it slowly, looking for a cleared lot. She found it between 2 low warehouses. Gravel. Weeds coming up through the gravel in the specific way that living things come up through whatever is laid over them, without urgency, without drama, just the persistent upward pressure of something that was here before the gravel and intends to be here after it. A chain-link fence with orange construction mesh along its lower section, sun-faded to a pale amber. And beyond it, the port cranes, moving their containers against the blue sky with the mechanical serenity of things that have no awareness of what they look like. They moved anyway. They went on moving. They were magnificent in the way that only things of enormous scale and complete indifference are magnificent. She parked. She got out of the car. She walked to the fence and stood in the gravel, looking at the cleared lot. A daughter had come to the geography of her father's last moments, and the place demanded stillness. This was where he fell. Not where his body landed. That was a matter of physics, of angles and trajectories, and the cold democracy of gravity. But this was the ground beneath the scaffold. This was the site. This was the land that someone had needed to clear for acquisition. The land whose survey her father had been assigned to certify. The land whose certification he had apparently been unwilling to sign, and for which unwillingness a man, with a middleman and a cash payment, had decided that Ernesto Reyes could be removed from the equation. She was past the kind of grief that cried easily. That kind had been used up in the first year, at the rosary, at the one-year mass, at odd moments in the years that followed when something would catch her off guard, and she would have to step outside or find a bathroom or keep driving. She was into the other kind now, the grief that went quiet and stayed. The grief that was the operating system rather than the event. She spoke to him, quietly, in Spanish, in the way she hadn't since the rosary itself, the private language of their family, the language in which Ernesto Reyes had told her she was going to be fine when she failed her first structural engineering exam, the language in which he had called her from the job site on her 31st birthday and sung her the birthday song with a degree of vocal confidence that his actual singing voice did not support. The language in which they had talked about her grandfather, about Havana, about the city they were from in spirit if not in body, about what it meant to build things in a place that had taken you in and might not always feel the way it felt right now. She told him what she had found. She told him about the signature. She told him about Marco. She told him she knew it wasn't an accident. She told him she was going to prove it. The wind off the water came through the chain link. The cranes moved their containers. The gulls went over. She stood in the gravel and looked at the cleared lot where the scaffold had stood 4 years ago, and she stood until she meant it. Until the words she had spoken to him were not performance or bravado, but the particular, quiet, load-bearing truth of a woman who had decided what she was going to do and was prepared to hold its full weight. He followed her. When she turned to walk back to her car, Marco was leaning against it. He was not doing anything, not on his phone, not looking at documents, just leaning against the passenger side of her car with his arms loosely crossed, the way a man leans against something when he has been there long enough to have settled into it. He had been there for some time. She stopped. The gravel was between them. The Port District light, industrial, unromantic, the light of working equipment and open sky, the only truly honest light that Miami produced, was full on both their faces. "I know," he said, before she could speak. "I know. You were watching me," she said. "Not me," he said. "Yesterday, after you left Bayfront, I noticed a car. It picked you up 2 blocks from the park. I ran the plates this morning." He paused. "Shell Company. Ties to Christian Mello's organization." Another pause. "They've had someone on you, Valentina. I drove here ahead of them and waited." She looked at him, processing this. The surveillance photograph that had arrived on her phone, someone professional, someone with a telephoto lens and a reason to use it, and a car that had been following her, and this man who had noticed the car and had chosen to come to a cleared lot in the Port District before her rather than call and warn her and let her make her own decisions about what to do with the warning. "You've been watching me," she said again. The statement hadn't changed. Its meaning had become slightly more complicated. "I've been keeping you safe," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" The question sat in the industrial air between them. He straightened from the car. She had not moved. "You've been withholding things from me," she said. "Information about the case. About the tale. About what you know." "So have you," he said. "The permit records. The forensic analysis of the signature. You've been working that on your own without telling me how far along you were." "Because it's my father," she said. The words came out steady and with more heat than she usually allowed. Because this is my family, Marco. It is not a file I can be professionally neutral about, and I was not going to bring it to you half-formed. And I was not going to bring you a threat I hadn't confirmed, he said, with equal steadiness. That's not indifference. That's care, managed badly. The silence that followed was the kind that contains two people recalibrating. She looked at him. He looked back, not a performance of steadiness, just steadiness itself, the real kind, the kind that knows it has made mistakes and does not flinch from them. He crossed the gravel to her. Not touching. Close. I was at that diner, he said. The night the photograph was taken. I was there because I wanted to be there. Not because of the case. Not because of the file. Because you had walked in from the rain and you were trying to hold everything together by yourself, and I wanted to be at that table. He stopped. Started again. I need you to know that. Whatever else is true about this case, and what I should and shouldn't have told you, I need you to know that. She looked at him in the Port District light. Unbeautiful, industrial, honest, the light that had no opinion about what it landed on and landed on it anyway. She said, "That makes everything harder." "I know," he said. They stood in the gravel. The cranes moved. The gulls went over the fence. The city hummed its enormous, indifferent hum around two people who were trying very hard to keep the case separate from the feeling and were finding that the two had been load-bearing walls for each other this entire time. Midnight. She had not turned the lights up all the way. She was at the drafting table, the permits, the notes, the printed scans, the working puzzle of it spread before her, organized now by a week of thinking into something that had legible structure. The lamp at her shoulder, the rain against the windows. The city outside reduced, by the density of the rain, to its most essential lights, the gold and white of towers across the bay, blurred by water into something almost impressionistic. Miami is memory rather than geography. The knock came at 11:40. She looked at it. The door, with the particular alertness of a woman who has been told she is being followed. Then she crossed the apartment and checked the peephole, and it was Marco, rain-soaked, jacket dark with it, standing in her hallway with no professional pretext visible anywhere on him. She opened the door. She stepped back. He came in. The rain followed him in the way rain follows people who have been in it a long time. In the smell of it, in the water still running from his jacket at the collar, in the wet sound of his shoes on her floor. She got him a towel from the bathroom without asking, because there are certain kinds of consideration that don't require permission. He took it. He held it for a moment without using it. "Camille called me," he said. "She's moving up the timeline on the recording. She's going to try to get it tomorrow, not in 3 days." He paused. She sounded careful, in the way people sound when someone might be listening. "All right," Valentina said. He looked at her. "Then, that's not why I'm here." She waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned it from her father, who had said once that the most important thing an inspector does is stand still in a space long enough for it to show you what it's actually doing. She waited the way she had learned from him, not passive at all, attentive, present. "I went back to the diner tonight," Marco said, "where we were in the photograph. I sat at the same table. I was trying to work out the angle, where the camera must have been positioned, what kind of lens, whether it was a vehicle or a fixed position." He stopped. "But I kept thinking about what you said at the park. What are we doing?" He looked at her directly. He did not, she noticed, look away. "I don't have a clean answer," he said. "I have a case I care about, and I have a woman I." He stopped himself. The apartment was very quiet except for the rain, which was very loud. "A woman you what?" she said. He said her name. Just her name, Valentina, the way he had said it at the park, with the specific weight of a man who is using a word to mean more than a word can technically mean, and who knows this, and is saying it anyway because he has run out of other ways to say the thing he is trying to say. His hand moved toward hers, and she let him take it. Not a kiss. Not yet. Not in this story, not in this moment, which was not yet that moment. Just the taking of her hand, his hand around hers, her hand in his, in the doorway of her apartment with the Miami rain coming down outside and the city's blurred lights through the window and the permits spread across the drafting table and the case and the vote and the photograph and the forged signature and Rafi and Camille and all of it, present in the room, not forgotten, not set aside, but somehow held alongside this other thing, this thing that had been accumulating since a diner on a rainy evening and a business card across a table and a name on a legal pad that a careful man had refused to cross off. They stood in it. The held hand, the rain, the city. A single truth settled over them. Some structures, once you understand their load-bearing nature, can never again be called temporary. The forgery confirmed. She had called in a favor. Professor Emilio Garces, chair of the Forensic Documentation Program at the University of Miami School of Architecture. She had worked on his historic preservation project 3 years ago, a restoration of a Coral Gables Mediterranean revival that had required exactly the kind of obsessive attention to original materials and period documentation that Garces's program specialized in. He had told her at the end of the project that she had saved the building, and she had told him that was his department, and he had laughed and said she could call him for anything. She had not called him for 3 years. She called him now. She emailed the scanned permit documents without explaining why. Just the 3 permits, the third one with the signature in question, and a brief note. I need a handwriting analysis on the signatures on these documents, specifically the third, comparing them against each other. Informal to start, then formal if you can. Call me when you've looked. He called back in 2 hours. The third document, he said. He did not begin with pleasantries, which was one of the things she had always appreciated about him. The signature is a forgery. Confident, trained, professional. Whoever did this had significant exposure to the genuine article. They had access to multiple samples, and they were patient. But the letter forms in the R and the S are inconsistent with the signatures on the first 2 documents in ways that suggest a different neuromotor signature, a different hand. In other words, however well practiced. A pause. The kick at the bottom of the R. It's not there. Everything else is very close. But that feature is absent. Thank you, Emilio, she said. Do you need this formally documented? Yes, she said. Chain of custody, affidavit, the full process. It will take a few days. I have 5, she said. And then, correcting herself, 4. She called Marco immediately. He answered on the first ring. She had the sense he had been waiting for something, though she was beginning to understand that Marco Duval was a man who was always, in some fundamental way, waiting for something. He told her Camille was moving. Noon, at the Overtown garage. 2 hours. Should I come? She said. No, he said. Quickly but not harshly. Let me do this part. Stay somewhere visible. The office, if you can stand it. She hated this. She had spent her entire working life in a field that rewarded presence. You showed up to a site, you walked it, you put your body in the space, and let the space tell you what it needed. The idea of sitting at her desk in Voss and Crane's offices while Marco drove to Overtown to get the recording that could unravel everything. The idea of performing normalcy while the most important thing she had ever been involved in moved toward its crisis without her. It was physically difficult. She stayed. She went back to the office. She sat at her desk. She opened the Solara Project renderings and she looked at them, and she thought, the hardest thing I have done in my professional life is design this building. The second hardest thing is sitting in this office today with my face not changing. She was still sitting there when Marco called from Overtown at 1:47 p.m. The note. The phone rang at 1:47 in the afternoon. An unknown number. Marco answered it the way he answered all unknown numbers, professionally, alert, giving nothing. Detective Duval. A woman's voice. Clinical, careful, the particular calm of someone accustomed to delivering news that cannot be softened by how it is said. This is Jackson Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about Camille Okafor. She's been listed as your contact in our What happened? He said. A hit and run on the I-395 ramp in Overtown. 11:48 in the morning, 45 minutes before their meeting. She was alive. The nurse was careful to say this first, twice. She was in surgery. The extent of her injuries was not yet fully assessed. The car that struck her had not been located. She had been brought in by a motorist who had seen the accident on the ramp, had called 911, had stayed with her until the paramedics arrived. The recording, if it existed, if Camille had been on her way to hand it over, if it had been what she said it was not with her. Her belongings, such as they were, had been catalogued by the admitting staff. A phone, her wallet, her keys. No envelope, no flash drive, no documentation of any kind. He sat in his car in the parking lot with the phone call ended, and the phone held in both hands in his lap, and he let it land. Camille Okafor, who had survived 4 years as a dead detective's widow and built something out of it, a council seat, a platform, a life with purpose and direction, was in surgery. 11:48 in the morning, 45 minutes before she was supposed to hand him a recording that connected Voss and Mello before the Solara acquisition. The people who would do anything. That was what she had said. That was the exact phrase she had used. He had not. He understood now, fully believed it. He had believed it professionally. He had believed it in the way that people in his line of work believe things, as a real possibility, to be taken seriously, to be planned around. He had not believed it the way he believed it now, sitting in a parking lot with the afternoon moving around his stationary car in the perfectly ordinary way that afternoons move, regardless of what has just happened inside a single phone call, inside a single vehicle on a single afternoon. He called Valentina. She didn't answer. The office phone, going to voicemail, because she was in a meeting or on another call, or sitting at her desk designing a building whose foundations she now knew the truth of. He called the burner. She answered on the first ring. Marco, she said. Just his name. Quiet. She had stepped outside. He could hear the open-air ambience of the Voss and Crane Terrace, the wind at height, the city below. Camille is in surgery, he said. Hit and run in Overtown this morning. 45 minutes before she was supposed to meet me. The silence on her end was not absence. It was the presence of something too large to speak around. The specific quality of silence that comes when a person is trying to hold something very heavy in very limited space and cannot yet afford to put it down. Marco, she said. I know, he said. They know we're close, she said. Her voice was steady. He had come to understand that her steadiness under pressure was not composure for its own sake. It was functional, structural. It was the steadiness of a woman who had been building things in difficult conditions her entire career and knew that the moment you stopped being steady was the moment the structure became vulnerable. They know we have something, or they think we have more than we have, and they're not willing to wait to find out. Yes, he said. The vote is in 4 days. Yes. A breath on her end. Then, what do we do? I need you to go somewhere safe, he said. Not the office. Not your apartment. Not tonight. Somewhere they don't have in any file connected to you professionally. He paused. Somewhere that isn't you. I can't just. Valentina. A pause. Please, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Martis. My cousin's house in Hialeah. They won't have that. Yes, he said. Good. Go there directly from the office. I'll be behind you inside an hour. All right, she said. And then, quietly, with the particular quality of someone who is accepting help, because she understands that the people who can afford to accept no help are the ones who eventually lose everything. Thank you. He put the car in gear. His phone buzzed. A text from Valentina's number. Not a call. A text. Sent in the 30 seconds since she had hung up and before she had left the terrace. A photograph. A manila envelope, photographed from above, lying open on a surface he recognized as the reception desk of Voss and Crane. Inside the envelope, she had photographed the contents. He enlarged the image with 2 fingers. A document, photocopied, the same format as the permits he had been looking at for a week. The 3rd permit, the one with the forged signature. The original, or a copy of the original. Clear, legible, every detail visible. Someone had left this at Voss and Crane's reception desk for Valentina Reyes. Beneath the document in the envelope, a card, cream-colored, the weight and finish of something expensive, and written on it, in a precise, slanting hand that he would recognize later in Diana Voss's office in the signed contracts on her wall, 4 words and 2 initials. Some things stay buried. DV. The city vote was in 4 days. Camille Okafor was in surgery in a hospital on the north edge of Overtown, and the recording she had been carrying, or going to carry, or had perhaps never had, but had believed she could get, was gone. Into whatever space things go when the people carrying them are struck on a highway ramp on a Tuesday morning in Miami by a car that did not stop. Guillermo Paz was at a construction site in Doral with his crew and his daughter's photograph in his wallet and a willingness to tell the truth that did not quite outweigh his willingness to keep her safe. Valentina Reyes had her father's forged signature and a note from the woman who had built her career and, now, a very clear communication from that woman that she knew what Valentina knew and was not afraid to say so, was, in fact, announcing it in the same way the surveillance photograph had announced itself. Look at what I know. Look at what I am willing to do with it. Make your decisions accordingly. Marco Duval had the name Christian Mello circled in red ink in a file that was no longer, precisely, off the books. Because someone had just made it personal. Someone had put a car on a highway ramp and struck a city council member 45 minutes before she was supposed to hand over evidence. And that was not the action of a person who was keeping something quiet anymore. That was the action of a person who had decided they were past the point of keeping things quiet and was moving now in the open, with the particular confidence of power that believes it cannot be touched. Miami did what Miami always did. It kept its beautiful face forward. The bay went gold in the late afternoon. The palms moved in the coastal wind. The towers caught the evening light and threw it back at the sky in 1,000 glass and steel reflections, the city admiring its own reflection the way beautiful cities do, the way they always have, the way they will continue to do long after the specific humans moving through them have resolved or failed to resolve their specific emergencies. The corruption was in the load-bearing structures. And the building, Valentina Reyes had always known, comes down from the inside. Episode 3 Preview, The Evidence. Hialeah at midnight. The kitchen of her cousin Marta's house smelled of cafe and plantains, and the particular domestic warmth of a house that does not know what is happening in the world outside its walls and is, by virtue of that ignorance, one of the most merciful places on earth. The television made its blue flicker from the next room. Somewhere down the block, a dog. The neighborhood settling into its own ordinary night. Valentina sat at the kitchen table with the permits spread before her and the note, the cream-colored card with its 4 words in Diana's precise, slanting script, held in one hand, and she was making a decision. She could feel the decision forming the way she felt structural decisions forming, not as a sudden resolution, but as a gradual recognition of what had always, inevitably, been the only viable option. You could not retrofit a compromised foundation. You had to go down to it and expose it and rebuild from there. Her phone rang. Not Marco's number. Not Rafi's. Unknown. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. A woman's voice. Low, careful, deliberate. The voice of someone who has thought for a long time about how and when to say the specific thing they are about to say. You don't know me, the woman said. But I knew your father. I worked with him. And I have something he left behind, in case anything ever happened to him. He said to wait. He said to wait until someone was asking the right questions. Valentina's hand tightened on the phone. In the kitchen, the refrigerator humming. The television from the other room. The smell of cafe. The ordinary mercy of a house going about its ordinary night. Who are you? Valentina said. The woman said a name Valentina did not recognize. A name that meant nothing to her yet, that had no context in any document she had seen or conversation she had had or record she had searched. A name that was, in that moment, just a sound, and then, immediately, the beginning of something. Meet me tomorrow, the woman said. Alone. Bring no one. I'll explain what your father was trying to stop, and what he hid the week before he died, so that someone who came looking would be able to finish it. The line went dead. Valentina sat in Marta's kitchen. She looked at the ceiling. She breathed. Outside the kitchen window, Hialeah in the rain, the night air carrying jasmine and wet asphalt and the warm weight of a city that was somebody's home and always had been, long before and long after any of this. The city breathing. Someone out there had known Ernesto Reyes, had worked beside him, had taken something from him in the week before he died and held it, for 4 years, waiting for exactly this. They had been waiting for her. Episode 3, The Evidence, coming soon. Forbidden Love. Miami is an original work of fiction. All characters, events, organizations, and locations depicted in this script are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.